Namaste and a warm welcome to each one of you this morning or this evening as the case might be. We are on the fourth day of this global festival of yoga being brought by Indica Yoga. Indica Yoga is a platform that intends to offer diverse and inclusive forms of yoga that are authentic, immersive, and transformative. Before we begin the session, I request each one of you to join us with an Om. Let's chant an Om and then begin the session. Sit comfortably with your back straight, eyes closed. Gather your awareness and focus on your breathing. Take a deep breath. We are honored and delighted to have Eddie and Hana with us today. In fact, it's quite late at their end, but they choose to be here. Thank you, Eddie and Hana, for that. Hana is an active member of GFY2020, that is Global Peace Initiative of Women, with whom we are partnering to bring you this month-long event. I would now request Hana to introduce GFY2020 and also anchor the session. Over to you, Hana.
Namaskar. Thank you so much, Vinaya Chandra, for the lovely introduction and leading us in the beautiful Om. So as Vinaya said, my name is Hana, and I work with the Global Peace Initiative of Women. We're an NGO based here in New York City, and we work on issues related to consciousness and spirituality and how to go within to address some of the biggest issues our world is facing. And we are currently working with Indica Yoga right now on this global yoga festival. We've known Anuradha and Vinaya for a really long time now, and they've been a lovely part of our network and come to a lot of events we've organized and just brought so much inspiration and Vedic knowledge. So we're just so grateful to know them. And it's really nice to connect with all of you today, and we're really pleased to be partnering with you and looking forward to a great month ahead as well. Today, we have a very interesting and super amazing speaker. His name is Eddie Stern, and he is a yoga teacher, author, and lecturer from New York City. He studied under Sri Patabi Joyce of Mysore for 19 years, and he's got an amazing story. He's the founder of the Broome Street Ganesh Temple and co-founder of Namarupa Magazine, the International Yoga and Science Conferences, and the Gun Violence Reduction Initiative, the Urban Yogis. So today, Eddie is going to be talking about the Kleshas. So for those of you who might not be so familiar with the Kleshas, Rishi Patanjali in the very beginning of the Sadhana Pada of the Yoga Sutras says that the practice of Kriya Yoga thins the Kleshas or obstructions to self-knowledge and prepares one for Samadhi. The descriptions of the Kleshas make it sound as though they are mental obstructions, yet the practices of Kriya Yoga include physical acts. So how is it that something physical can thin or reduce something that has no physical form? So today, we will be discussing the physiological location of the Kleshas and how Kriya Yoga specifically works on our brain and nervous system. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to my dear friend, Eddie.
Thank you very much, Rasika, and thank you, Vinaya Chandra. It's a pleasure to be here again with Indica Yoga. So our topic for this lecture is going to be on the Kleshas and a little bit on physiology. We will discuss what the Kleshas are, what Kriya Yoga is, what aspects of our physiology are going to be affected by these practices, and how this relates to the overall project of the yogis. So we'll start this exploration going back a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago or so, when I began participating in scientific research on yoga. And from 1988 or so, earlier 1986, 87, up until around the year 2000, I was very, very much into only traditional yoga, practicing, studying the Upanishads and learning how to chant and do ritual. And that was solely everything that I worked on. That was my existence. And one day in around 2002 or so, a researcher and a doctor named Marshall Higgins walked into my yoga school. He had been suggested to come speak to me by someone at Columbia University as someone who could help him design a study for research he was doing on pre-hypertensive conditions in African Americans. And he wanted to see if yoga would be able to help reduce their blood pressure. So he came to me, we spoke for a while. I told him I really knew nothing about science. My education was only in yoga, but I would do my best to design something for him that I thought might be able to help. We did the study. It lasted about 2 years. It had quite positive outcomes. And we then had the opportunity to work together again on another study and then another after that. And the third study that we embarked on together was to study grade point average in high school students. And we compared 40 weeks of yoga to 40 weeks of physical education in a randomized controlled trial to see what would happen, if anything, to the grade point average of these students. And after all the results came in, it turned out that the students who had 40 sessions of yoga had a 2.7% rise in their grade point average over the students who only had physical education. As we began doing more research and working a little bit more in public education, I started to wonder how it was that this one study on hypertension and another study on grade point average were yielding both positive results when the protocols that we used for the study were in fact very, very similar. I based everything off of Ashtanga yoga for the curriculums, and though they were modified practices, there were not a lot of differences that you could find in these protocols. And so the question I started asking was, what is it that yoga is really working on? Do the types of poses really matter so much for particular outcomes? Or is there something deeper which is happening? So of course, yes, the postures do matter for particular outcomes, but definitely there is something deeper happening. And what my supposition was that the yoga asanas and the breathing and the focused attention were working on the nervous system. And in particular, that they were working on the aspect of the nervous system related to homeostasis, which is the body's ability to restore itself to balance. So it's very easy to throw ourselves out of balance, of course. We only need to do a few simple things. If you would like to be completely out of balance in your life, or even moderately out of balance, then you can try not sleeping enough, eating a really poor diet, primarily say of oily, greasy, stale, or processed foods. You can smoke. You can not exercise at all. You can avoid spending time around people you like, and you can expose yourself to a lot of stress. So if you do those 5 things, it's guaranteed that you are going to throw off balance in your life and your health is going to decrease. If you would like to bring yourself into balance, then you do the opposite. You make sure you get enough sleep, you eat clean, healthy foods, you get some exercise, spend time around people you like, and expose yourself to situations that are supportive and not stressful. And the exercise can include things like yoga, and the non-stressful situations can include things like meditating. So with that small little recipe, you can either restore or destroy your internal balance. Now, what is it specifically and precisely which is throwing the balance off, that is moderating the balance, this is going to be your homeostatic function. So homeostasis, as the ability of your body to restore balance, it does this automatically. So no matter what, all throughout the day, homeostasis is occurring within us. Anytime there's a temperature change, our body is going to change temperature in order to moderate itself with the outer environment. We have other cycles that homeostasis is going to be in touch with and working with, like the circadian rhythm. So when it gets dark out, then naturally we begin to get sleepy. When the sun comes up, time for us to wake up. So along with the rhythms and patterns of our waking and sleeping cycles, our digestive cycles, our body temperature, our blood pressure, our respiration, our digestion, homeostasis is going to be a part of the balancing of those pattern systems. So if we support homeostasis, everything flows and we are balanced. If we don't support homeostasis, then we're going to get thrown off balance. Okay, so this is one of the first things that I was looking at. What is it specifically that yoga is addressing in regards to homeostasis? Now, this is not a new idea. You see this in a lot of studies on yoga. At SVYASA and at the Patanjali Yoga Research Institute, they know everything about homeostasis and how yoga is affecting it. So from there, I began to look one step deeper, and I started to look at the functions of the vagus nerve in regards to how it moderates inflammation in the body, which is also going to either support or throw off homeostasis. So the vagus nerve, for those who are not familiar, is the 10th cranial nerve. We have 12 cranial nerves, and most of the cranial nerves, they go from the shoulder area, and that's this top part of the neck, all the way up through the facial muscles. 11 of the cranial nerves do not go below this level. Only one of the cranial nerves does, and that's the vagus nerve. Vagus is from the Latin, which means to wander. And the vagus nerve is going to come from a little bit above the brainstem. It's going to come down through the trachea, the larynx, into our heart and lungs, into the liver, the pancreas, the spleen, the stomach, and the intestines. And it's going to pick up messages from the visceral organs and send them back up to the brain to tell the brain what the condition of the body is, what's happening, and then the brain will act to that. Now, the vagus nerve does a bunch of interesting things. Aside from being a bidirectional nerve to communicate back and forth between the visceral body and the brain, it's also responsible or takes a part in the expression of emotion. So Darwin said that we experience emotions in the center of the heart, and this is something you find in the Upanishads as well. And the sensations or the feelings that we feel, the emotions we feel at the heart, we then express those feelings through our vocal tone and through our facial expressions. So I can moderate my vocal tone to express all sorts of range of emotion, and I can change my facial expression to illustrate those emotions as well. And you can read them because of your vagus nerve, and I can express them because of my vagus nerve. So when the vagus nerve is toned and information is flowing well, I can express things properly through my face and vocal tone, and you can hear them and see them properly as well through the tone of your vagus nerve too. So we co-regulate each other as we communicate, as we interact. So another thing that the vagus nerve does is it controls inflammation in the body. So inflammation is going to be, when there's high levels of inflammation, we get incidences of our 5 primary non-communicable and preventable diseases, including heart disease, certain types of cancers, certain types of diabetes, digestive disorders, and anxiety and depression. So these 5 are all linked to higher levels of inflammation in the body. And these are 95% of the diseases that are prevalent in the world today. Lower levels of inflammation are going to lead to the opposite. Lower levels of inflammation will lead to better homeostatic function, better or higher heart rate variability, which is an indicator of cardiovascular health, better digestion, better sleep, less pain in the body, lower levels of anxiety or nervousness, more ability to spend time on task and engage in task completion, and also to have a higher sense and a higher contact with meaning and purpose in your life. So you have a deeper sense of who you are, what you should be doing, and how you should carry those things out forward. So all of these types of things related to the vagus nerve and relating to homeostasis from a scientific perspective sounded very much to me like the things that I had studied in the yogic texts. So for example, when we look at the functions of the nervous system, some of the things that the nervous system are going to do is that they're going to take care of any incoming information, whether that information is food or something through the sense organ or air. And as that information comes in, it's going to assimilate that information. And then whatever it can't use, it's going to remove. And whatever it can use, it's going to circulate and then use that assimilated and circulated energy then to express and to act in the world. So these basic functions of the nervous system sounded very much to me like the 5 pranas, the pancha pranas. That we have nourishment that comes in as prana, we have waste that goes out as apana, we have assimilation or digestion, which is samana, we have distribution of all of that nourishment to the entire body, which is vyana, and then using all of that vitality and power, we act in the world through udana, through the upward or outward pranas, expression, vocalization, acting in the world, the powering of the body. So all these pieces were starting to form together a little bit. We had these ideas of homeostasis and the functions of the nervous system, the 5 pranas, the fact that yoga was somehow targeting the nervous system. But there was still a little bit more that I needed to look at that was going to fill out the rest of the picture for me. And part of that picture started to get filled in when I was looking into the Sadhana Pada of Patanjali Yoga Sutra, and the very first sutra of the second book, the book on, or the pada on practice, says that the 3 actions in yoga, the Kriya yoga, are tapas, swadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana. The 3 main components or actions in yoga are tapas, which is things related to the body, austerities related to the body like asanas and pranayama, and swadhyaya, which is vocalization through chanting. And later we know of swadhyaya as self-evaluation, but in more traditional representations, it's the repetition of mantra as well as the study of the sacred texts. And then last is ishvara pranidhana. Surrender to God, surrender to the Lord, surrender to Ishvara. So we have these 3 basic things: tapas, related to the body; swadhyaya, related to vocalization or expression; and Ishvara pranidhana, related to the mind and, of course, to the emotions, because to surrender requires devotion. And so what do these 3 things do? Well, Patanjali says that they thin the kleshas and they prepare you for samadhi, for deep levels of concentration. So what are the kleshas? Now we know what the actions of yoga are. We're going to talk a little bit more about them, but what are the kleshas? So the kleshas are 5-fold, and these are said to be the 5 reasons why we suffer. And very briefly, and not in a terribly deep or elaborate way, these are avidya, asmita, raga, dvesha, abhinivesha. So avidya is a not full knowing of who we are. We know a little bit of who we are, but we don't completely know ourselves as pure being, as consciousness, as the self. We know ourselves as mixed with some other types of things. So when we don't fully know who we are, this becomes the field for all of the other obstructions to suffering or to sorrow that arise. And the next thing is called asmita, which is I-ness. And so I-ness are also like our narratives, the stories we tell about ourselves. So when we don't fully completely know who we are, then we make up a story because we have to fill in the blanks. And those stories are going to be based basically on 2 things, on raga and dvesha. Raga is our attachments to the things that we like, and dvesha are attachments to the things that we don't like. Okay, so just to elaborate a little bit more on asmita as our narrative, if if I don't fully know who I am, then as I'm, born into the world and I'm raised, all of the things that the land that I'm born into, the family that I'm born into, the culture that I'm raised in, the schools that I go to, the language that I speak, the foods that I eat, the clothes that I wear, the music that I listen to, the movies that I'm exposed to, the literature that I read, the politics that are coming my way, all of these, the art that I see, the nature of the landscape, all of these things are going to contribute to how I self-identify. So when we identify completely within ourselves as consciousness or as self, then that's something called self-referral. This is in the words of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, as well as Foucault, use these types of words as well. So when we measure ourselves by ourself, then we are self-referral. And that is how we form our sense of being based on who we truly are. But when we don't know who we are, then we use object referral to form an idea of who we are. And the object referral would be to looking to the world of things around us and measuring ourselves by those things. So this will be comparing, judging, imitating, identifying. We see an advertisement of someone who dresses in a way that we think is appealing. We might dress the way they do. We have a teacher who has a particular inflection or tone of voice, and we want to imitate them to be like them. And so we unwittingly, we begin to imitate them. So we have all these subconscious ways of using the objects of the world to fulfill our sense of identity. Some are conscious, some are unconscious, and some of them are genetic, and some of them come from simply the circumstances that we're born into. As we grow, we begin to reinforce those biases that we have built in through our contact of our sense organs with the world. So we begin to reinforce those biases. And every time we come across something that we think is a little bit more appealing, or will make a better version of who we think we want to be, we reaffirm new biases. And what this is the creation of narrative, the creation of story that we begin to live by. So we live by these stories that are everything other than who we truly are. And the stories are based completely on, or mostly on, the things we like and the things we don't like. So if I completely only like eating one type of food, then maybe I set myself off from all the other types of food that I don't like to eat. And I identify with that type of food and the other people who also like that kind of food as well. So you see, we begin to set ourselves into groups and into little cliques based on liking particular things that might be totally arbitrary, and then moving towards the people who also like those same things. Okay, so these are, the raga is moving towards the things we like, the dvesha, we set ourselves apart. If we don't like something, we might be very attached to not liking that thing. I can be very attached to not liking another political party as much as I can be attached to liking my own. I can be very attached to my own philosophical point of view and be very attached to disagreeing with other philosophical points of views, because by disagreeing with them, I affirm my story. So the dvesha that we have towards the objects of the worlds around us, whether they're philosophical things or whether they're physical things, are also to reaffirm the hold we have on our stories. And so in this, we have the final, which is abhinivesha, which is clinging to life, or the fear of extinction. And so this clinging to life or clinging to extinction is that we feel that who would we be if we were not our story? And we look all the way back to avidya, which is a not full knowing of who we are. And since we don't fully know who we are, the only thing we have is our story. And if our stories are taken away from us, we'll have nothing. So we'll be completely extinct. We'll be non-existent. It won't be that we'll be the self. We won't be consciousness. We won't be liberated. We will cease to exist. And that prospect is terrifying. It's more terrifying than death. So we strive to survive. And that's the name of the game. It says in Yoga Sutra that even in the wise, the thread of abhinivesha holds firm. So the survival instinct is hardwired into us somehow. And we can see within the Kleshas that the last of them, the Abhinivesha, is the thing which makes us cling to all of the others. So Patanjali says we need to somehow thin these Kleshas. We need to weaken their hold on us so that we can move towards deeper or higher levels of consciousness and come closer to cleansing the buddhi so it fully shines with Purusha within it, or reflects Purusha within it. So looking at that, I wondered, okay, the 3 actions in yoga, the Kriya Yoga, will help to thin the Kleshas. Tapas, Swadhyaya, Ishvara, Pranidhana. They will help to thin these Kleshas, but the Kleshas, as Avidya, Asmita, Raga, Dvesha, Abhinivesha, they sound to me like they are mental propositions. These don't sound like physical things. Not knowing who I am doesn't sound physical, that sounds mental. Creating a fake story, that sounds like my imagination. The Asmita sounds like the creation through imagination and through thinking, so that doesn't seem physical. Raga and Dvesha, which are likes and dislikes, can only form in the mind, so that's also not physical. Maybe it's expressed physically, but that's not how it starts. And this clinging to all these, the fear of extinction, perhaps has some physicalist tendencies to it, but it also sounds to me pretty much like it's a mental thing, that it can be conquered mentally. So why should we then use tapas, something physical, to begin to thin something which is not physical, which can't really be seen, which doesn't have a form or a substance? So thinking on this, I looked back into the autonomic nervous system. And the functions of the pranas, and some of the things as well that the autonomic nervous system takes care of. So what does the autonomic nervous system do? It keeps those functions running and going that we need to have happen so that we can live every day, but that we don't have time to think about. So these are going to be our respiration, our heartbeat, our blood pressure, digestion, sleep, and sexual reproduction. Okay, if we had to think about any of these things throughout the day, we wouldn't be able to do anything else. So for example, if we needed to think about respiration all through the day and keep it going consciously, we wouldn't be able to sleep. And we certainly wouldn't be able to eat. If we had to think about digesting our food all the time, we'd have to think about all the 500 or 1,000 different complicated processes that go into the digestion of food. We wouldn't be able to get anything done, walk down the street while we're trying to consciously digest. So the autonomic nervous system is going to keep all these functions going throughout the day so that we can be alive. And so what does that mean? That means that the survival functions of the autonomic nervous system, and that's what they're called: respiration, heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, elimination, sleep, sexual reproduction. These are all survival functions. Without these things, we do not survive. And so within our brainstem, we have a physiological location and modus operandi of survival, that these things are going to keep us alive. And so I looked at the practices of the yogis and I thought, okay, so, well, what did the yogis teach us to do? Well, number one, they taught us to do asanas. And through asanas, which are postures, one of the things that posture does is it affects blood pressure. So even if you hold yourself deliberately and sit up straight, it sends messages to the baroreceptors around the carotid arteries to monitor your blood pressure. So that's a survival function. Number two, pranayama. These pranayama or deep breathing practices are going to affect the tone of the vagus nerve through conscious regulated respiration. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute or two. So vagal nerve tone is going to be regulated through pranayama. And then we have dietary restrictions. Okay, so digestion is a survival function. So now the yogis are using diet to address the survival function. brahmacharya for sexuality. That's another one. Restriction of sleep. The yogis would go to sleep early, and they would get up very, very early too. They would restrict the amount of sleep that they had during the night so they could get up and do practices, primarily spiritual practices. So the main practices that the yogis taught on a physicalist level all seem to be targeting brainstem functions: asanas, pranayama, diet, sexuality, sleep. All of these 5 are affecting survival functions of the autonomic nervous system. And so what happens when you begin to consciously and willfully address the things that normally keep us alive? And the question seems to be that by restricting a function which normally is operating on an unconscious level, when we engage with it consciously, we begin to question, okay, what is this thing of survival at all? So if normally my autonomic nervous system is keeping my respiration going, who will I be if I restrain my breath for a little while every day? Like, I know who I am. Sorry, a light just went off outside. I know who I am when my breathing is going unconsciously throughout the day. I'm my narrative because my breath is being taken care of. Now I can fully be my narrative. But if I restrain my breathing, if I willfully hold the breathing and change the flow of my breath for a little while every day, then who will I be when I'm not breathing? When I'm consciously not breathing, who will I become? And who will I be when I restrain my body in a posture for a little while every day, an hour or 2 hours? Where will my identification shift to if it's not with my body at that time? And who will I be when I restrain my food if I'm not becoming a slave to the things that I want to eat or the need to eat or the desire to eat? Then who will I be identifying with it at that point? And when I restrain my sleep and restrain my sexuality. So all of these purposeful practices that are addressing brainstem functions are the things that help us to then move our awareness out from being locked in the survival of the brainstem so that we can access higher level of brain function. So we move from being trapped in the brainstem survival region to then moving into the limbic system, where we can deal with the thinning of the amygdala and fear and the expression and balance of emotions. As well, there are other deep structures in the brain which are near the limbic system, like the reticular activating system, which deals with states of consciousness. And then when we move past the limbic system and emotions and fear and also memory, then we move into the higher levels of brain function of the prefrontal cortex, where we can express compassion and empathy and long-range planning and time on task, and also pro-social interaction, communication, integration, seeing things in a holistic fashion. So by transcending survival functions, we can move through limbic functions in the midbrain and then into the higher level functions of the prefrontal cortex that have many related operations that have to do with spiritual evolution of things that you also find later on in Yoga Sutra. So if we want to be able to express Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Unupeksha, which is friendliness and compassion and sympathetic joy and equanimity of mind, these are all prefrontal cortex functions of the brain. We express all of these Brahma Viharas from that level. So the transcendence of the survival functions is necessary to do that. Okay, so we have this idea of the yoga sadhanas are addressing on a physical level the activities that are being expressed through the brainstem. They allow us to enter into higher levels of brain function until we get to the point where we have cohesive, harmonious, full whole brain function at the same time, which are basically liberated states. But this didn't completely fully make the link and answer the question to how does this link to the Kleshas? So the obvious thing to look at was the idea of abhinivesha, of clinging to life. So that the clinging to life is the survival function of our psyche. the clinging to our narrative. And within the brainstem, the clinging to life is represented through the functions of the autonomic nervous system, respiration, heart rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that as we begin to transcend or control or form a relationship with our brainstem functions, at the same time we begin to weaken the hold of abhinivesha, which is making us cling so firmly to the necessity to depend on our survival in a physicalist manner, and know that there is survival of consciousness beyond the physicalist. And so through the weakening first of abhinivesha, through directly working on that with concrete practices like asanas and pranayama that you find in tapas, then the Ishvara pranidhana, then the swadhyaya, begins to move us into the limbic system functions through chanting, vocalization, and expression. And the chanting and vocalization and expression, and also the understanding of the meaning as we study the text and as we chant, begins to free us a little from raga and dvesha, from likes and dislikes, because we're training our mind through language, through chanting, through harmonization, and at the same time applying the meaning of the text to it, so that we begin to loosen and weaken this hold of defining ourselves through our likes and our dislikes, because we're having a new point of reference, something deeper that the swadhyaya is giving us. And then the Ishvara pranidhana brings us to the highest level of integrated brain function, which is going to address avidya, the not full knowing of who we are. And that for the full, complete knowing of who we are demands that our consciousness moves inwardly. And it is through Ishvara pranidhana, according to Patanjali, that we have that inward movement of consciousness. That tataha pratyak chetana adigamo. So this is my reflections on the physiological, not location, but the physiological reflection of the kleshas. How can we find these 5 obstructions to knowing who we are and the 5 reasons why we suffer that all feel like mental things? Where can we find them in our body? Well, we can find them in the functions of our autonomic nervous system, which uses survival as its basis. And this is starting with abhinivesha in the survival functions of the brain, and then moving up towards the higher levels of the brain, where we can express the qualities and practices of Ishvara pranidhana. Now, the vagus nerve is the last thing that we're going to touch upon. The vagus nerve is, as we already said, this 10th cranial nerve. It's involved in both bidirectional processes. And it also needs to be mentioned, most importantly, that the vagus nerve really is the parasympathetic nervous system. 80% of the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve, and it's the oldest branch of our nervous system, which has been developing for well over 100 million years. As the parasympathetic nervous system, it is the relaxation response. The sympathetic nervous system is going to be the stress response in a very reductionist type of way. The sympathetic nervous system does a whole lot of things. It is anything that causes us to move towards activity is going to be ruled by the vagus, by the sympathetic, and anything which causes us to slow down or relax is going to be parasympathetic. There are other words that are used for these as well. Now, the tone of the vagus nerve is going to be very important for messages to be sent between the emotions and expression, for pro-social communication, for getting along with people outside of us, for being able to have processing of information from the microbiome up to the brain as well. The vagus nerve does a tremendous amount of important things. And when the vagus nerve is toned, then information flows and we can express all these things. And when the vagus nerve is not toned, then the information flows are not going to be, they're not going to be working quite as well. And we'll have higher levels of inflammation in the body, higher levels of anxiety, etc. So what are the things that will help us to tone the vagus nerve? So these are super key, super important things. Number one Dr. Stephen Porges, who presented a theory called the polyvagal theory, has shown that posture or intentional holding of the body is going to stimulate the vagus nerve through stimulating the carotid, the baroreceptors around the carotid arteries, monitoring blood pressure. So posture is number one. Number two is breathing. That rhythmic breathing is going to send messages from the abdomen, the steady moving in and out of the abdomen or the expanding of the diaphragm is going to send messages of safety, rhythmicity, calm, and evenness to the brain through the vagus nerve from the abdominal efferents. Okay, so through the rhythmicity of breathing, we get these messages of calm and safety and integration sent to the brain. Next is vocalization. Vocalization, humming, chanting, singing is going to stimulate the vagal nerves in the area of the larynx. And the last is behavior. That anger and anxiety has been shown to interrupt vagal tone, and expressions of kindness and appreciation and gratitude have been shown to improve vagal tone. So we have these four things. We have posture, breathing, vocalization, and behavior. So if we look to Patanjali again, we see the first four limbs of Ashtanga Yoga are going to be yama, which are behaviors, and niyama, where we find swadhyaya, which is vocalization, asana, which is posture, and pranayama, which is going to be the breathing practices. So the first four limbs of Ashtanga Yoga directly target the vagus nerve and vagal tone. So we have lower levels of inflammation of the body that allow us to consciously activate the conscious control of brainstem functions so that we can transcend to higher levels of brainstem functions and then have total integrated being. The last part of that, which is interesting, is that there are two places where I have heard of that the vagus nerve has been described as where the Sushumna Nadi is existing. And these were a book by Vasant Rele in 1927. This was published in Mumbai, called The Mysterious Kundalini, and another is my teacher, Patabi Joyce. They both spoke about the Sushumna Nadi existing in the vagus nerve. And the Sushumna Nadi, when all of the pranas are balanced in Ida and Pingala, when these pranas are balanced and all impurities are moved away, then the prana or energy moves into the Sushumna and we experience unity consciousness. So within the vagus nerve is one of the places where unity consciousness has been located. Okay, so yes, this is, I know a lot of information, it was many years of investigation and thinking about it to pull it all together in this type of a way. But it seemed to make sense to me, and I passed it by several scholars, including Subhash Kak and Deepak Chopra and Murali Doriaswamy and some others. And I said, well, what do you think? Does it sound reasonable to you? And after they thought that it sounded okay, they said, yeah, that sounds like it's a reasonable thing. You should write it up. So I did, and that became my book, One Simple Thing. So that's all. That is the physiological basis for the kleshas. I apologize if that was too much information, and I hope that was interesting. And let's go ahead and take some questions. I see a bunch of them in the chat room, so if you don't mind, I'll just open that up and I'll start answering them. Is that okay, Rasika? You don't mind? Great.
I'm perfect.
Go ahead and just open this up and I'll start going through these. Okay, so any particular way according to yoga or pranayama to stimulate vagus nerve special pain for instant relief, even anger or anxiety? Okay, so I would say that instant relief is always a tricky thing to look for. And when we look into yoga and Ayurveda, we're not looking for instant relief. We're looking for long-lasting change that affects character trait physiological traits and things like that. So like it says in Yoga Sutra, Satu Jirga Kala Nairantarya Satkara Asevita Dridda Bhumihi. After a long time of continuous practice with devotion, you become grounded in abhyasa. So what I often recommend to people who say, you know, what do I do when I get really angry? What do I do when I'm having a conflict with someone? So if you're in the heat of the moment and you don't have a practice which has trained you to deal with that conflict, then frankly, in that heat of the moment, there's almost nothing you can do. Even if you are well trained, sometimes there's nothing you can do because you lose your temper anyway. So what we want to do is we want to do a little bit of a daily practice that will train us and prepare us for a crisis moment. So long, slow, even breathing, for example, is a very simple practice that anyone can do, where you inhale and exhale for an even amount. You can inhale for a count of 6 or a count of 6 ohms, and then you can exhale for a count of 6 or even 8 ohms. And if you do that for, say, 7 to 15 minutes every day, after a couple of weeks, you'll start to see a change in your baseline response to crisis. So when it comes to downregulating the sympathetic nervous system, what we're really looking for is to change our baseline response of our nervous system to crisis or to threat. So one of the things that the sympathetic nervous system does is it perceives threat in the world around us. And if we're already stressed out, then we perceive threat in places where there might not be a threat. For example, if we had an argument with someone and then we see 2 days later an email from them on our inbox, and automatically the argument feeling comes back in us. We get stressed and we get angry, and we read the email and maybe they're apologizing or inviting us out for a cup of tea. So we perceived a threat that wasn't there. And what we want to do is we want to begin to change that by changing consciously the tone of our nervous system. And that takes some time to do, and that takes some practice. But when we really do change that tone of the nervous system and the underlying character trait of the mind, then we're going to respond to threat in a very different way. So I would say if you have patients that you want to have deal with anger or anxiety, start them on a breathing practice. Maybe not even it could be a meditation practice, but breathing is a lot easier for people because it's something you can hold on to. Resonance breathing is good. I wouldn't suggest pranayamas with breath holds. I would suggest regulated breathing to start. Even inhale, even exhale. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Okay, so Deborah, it is so much to assimilate. Yes, I know, I'm sorry, sometimes I talk too much. Do you have books which can be referred to? So much to learn. Okay, so I have, I will give a shameless plug for my book. It's called One Simple Thing, A New Look at the Science of Yoga and How It Can Transform Your Life. It is published in India by Pan Macmillan, readily available on Amazon or your favorite bookseller. And I cover all of this material and more in that book. So you could take a look there. So the Robin Williams question is a little bit slightly, I think, on a different track, but I understand what you're asking. Dr. Jai Gupta, hi, do you think vagus nerve can be related to chakras? So Dr. Gupta, I think that the endocrine system is more related to chakras, and I think the vagus nerve is more related to the nadi systems. And the nadi systems are Shiras, Dhamani, and Nadi, which are the blood vessels, the nerves themselves, and the subtle channels. So I think vagus is more related to the nadi system, and chakras more related to endocrine system and also immune system. And actually that's the topic of my next book. Do specific asanas stimulate the vagus nerve? So Vidya, yes, definitely. For example, the Jalandhara Bandha, that stimulates vagus nerve right here, compressing in this area. The Uddiyana Kriya, where you suck the abdomen all the way fully up under the ribs, that definitely is stimulating the vagus nerves in the abdominal region. And then remember that the vagus nerves are going to target end organs. So it's coming from the brainstem down to the heart and the lungs and the liver, the pancreas, the stomach. These are all end organs, which are recipients of messages of vagus nerve, vagal tone, and they're sending them back up as well. So whenever we're putting pressure on an end organ, we're also sending messages back up to the brain. So any asana, for example, where you put pressure on the liver, twisting this way, or on the pancreas, twisting this way, or on the stomach, doing Mayurasana, all of these are going to be stimulating vagal tone through the end organ. Dr. Reddy, for infertility through vagus nerve, I'm not too sure. I'd have to ask about that. Okay, so Jacqueline says, you mentioned the unity consciousness is partly in vagus nerve. Where else in the body is this? How about the pericardium? So I don't think it would be in the pericardium, because the pericardium is just going to be the sac covering and protecting the heart. But what you see in the Chandogya Upanishad is that they say from the heart, there are 101 nadis arising from the heart. And 3 of those are going to be Ida, Pingala, and Sushumna. And so it is in that Sushumna nadi arising from the heart that travels up to the brain that you have this unity consciousness experience. You also see this written about in Taittiriya Upanishad as well. Dr. Bharadwaj, how yoga practices would be helpful for our immune system in fighting bacteria or viruses. Okay, so yoga practices can be helpful to support and strengthen the immune function, which, as you know, is a very complicated system, through overall lifestyle changes. So if we sleep enough, if we eat clean, healthy foods, if we do some exercise, if we have positive outlook and spend time with friends, do some meditation and some breathing, all of those types of things are going to hopefully help support immune function. But if we overdo the exercise, overdo the meditation, don't sleep enough, or expose ourselves to toxic environments, then of course we're going to weaken our immune system through the release of too many cytokines. In fact, COVID-19 is known to be lethal with the cytokine storms that are attacking the lungs and filling the lungs with fluid, causing pneumonia, as well as a lot of other problems. When it comes to keeping our immune system healthy or supported, and I won't use the word boost because that's not, I don't think, from what I understand medically, we cannot actually boost our immune system, but we can support its function. All these lifestyle changes will do that. In regards to fighting bacteria or viruses, we do have a specific chemical released in the nasal passages called nitric oxide, and the nitric oxide is supposed to be efficacious in fighting off bacteria. That's why it's in the nose and why nostril breathing is good. There are plenty of good articles about this on the internet from one of the doctors who discovered nitric oxide and received discovered it in the nasal passageways and received a Nobel Prize for that. So there is some thinking that through nostril breathing, we can help to prevent bacteria coming in. And if you happen to catch something like COVID-19, that some long, smooth, deep breathing can be very helpful for a quicker recovery to keep elasticity of the lungs. Otherwise, they'll get very stiff. Sunil Kumar said, does tapas indicate the middle path or extreme self-mortification is done by some yogis and early on by the Buddha? So Swami Harihar Ananda Aranya describes tapas is that austerity that does not cause a pathological disturbance to the mind. So it should be challenging enough that it increases and improves our resilience and our ability to withstand difficulty. Because we are going to have ups and downs in life. We are going to face difficulties in life, and we need to have the fortitude to withstand them. So to have the fortitude to withstand the ups and downs of life with a calm mind is tapas, not extreme mortification. Any specific research on practice on Mahamudra and its impact on vagus nerve? So I do not know, but I think that would be an awesome thing to study, because in Mahamudra, you do have the pressure of the heel on the perineum, which is going to connect to the nerves coming in the anus that go to the pubococcygeal region and connect with vagal nerves in the abdomen. You have the 3 bandhas that you're doing while the spine is straight. So that's a really interesting question, and maybe we can talk to Dr. Shirley Tellis about doing some research on that. I love that idea. And let's see. Okay. And Deborah wanted to know, is there any book I can recommend? You can learn the function of each asana in primary practice. Yes, you can see the book by Sharat Joyce. He has a book on the primary series called Ashtanga Yoga Anushtana. So that's quite a good book, and there are others as well if for some reason that's not available. So Jacqueline said, I mentioned the vagus is 80% PNS, and it's 20% sympathetic nervous system. It is 80% sensory and 20% motor nerves. Okay, and Deepti says, what about homotherapy or Agnihotra also explains prevention for COVID-19? I am being directed by Vinay Chandra to go into the Q&A box where there are more questions. Oh, I better jump over there. And so I'm not too sure, Deepti, about that. I haven't looked into any of that research. Okay, so Dr. Jai Gupta, if mantras stimulate chakras, voice works with pranas. I think endocrine and pranayama are related after all the nervous system is one. Yes, so most definitely, Dr. Gupta, that we have the neuroendocrine system and immune system is tied into it. So I think that there's a lot of overlap and they all work together. We only separate them for the sake of discussion and investigation. But of course, in quote unquote reality, this whole thing is operating as one cohesive environment, and we want to support the function of that environment. But I think your point is well taken, absolutely. Okay, so let me jump into the Q&A box now. And Vinay Chandra or Rasika, just tell me when I need to stop, okay? So let's see. I answered that question, Sunil. Anagha, can we practice yoga as therapy for cure of hypertension without medicines? There are people who are doing this. If you look to S. Vyasa, and Vinay Chandra can help guide you in this. They do a lot of work with hypertension without medicine, and so does Kaivalyadham. So you can go ahead and look to those sources. There is a lot of work in India being done with that. You are very welcome, Dr. Reddy. And Sandhya says, does pranayama work equally well if one is living in a city with high pollution levels? Well, of course, you're going to feel more effects of pranayama if you are in the countryside or by the ocean. I live in a city that has quite high pollution levels. It's called New York. And but you know what pranayama is doing is it's not so much that it's the oxygen you're concerned with. The thing that we're concerned with is the functions of your nervous system and the branches of the nervous system. So you're moderating and controlling the flow of the inhale and exhale. And what you're really doing is you're getting in touch with the mechanism which is controlling the inhale and exhale. You're overriding it for a little while to do something very deliberate to the nervous system. So even if you don't have great air around you, you'll still get benefit to the nervous system from practicing these. So one asks, in a society where one doesn't believe in God, we're not doing religious practice, how can I connect Ishvara Pranidhana in my internal process? Okay, so one answer to this is that Ishvara, by definition, stands outside of time and space. and is the seed of omniscience, which means he's the fullness, which is not particularized into form or into many parts, because he is the seed of all knowing and the seed of all being. So what does that mean? That means that we can't possibly know that seed because we are products of the parts. And so Ishvara then can become an unknowable principle, which is why one may surrender to Ishvara as the supreme. But if you don't believe in God, you can also surrender to Ishvara as the unknown. You can say, well, I might not believe in God, but maybe I believe in nature or the sacred or some type of divinity, or maybe I just believe in existence. But even that thing that I might believe in, like nature, it's still unknown, it's still bigger than me. And that even though I might know some of the things I might be doing today, I don't know what I will be doing tomorrow, and I don't know what the outcome of my actions today will bring me tomorrow. Even if I do my actions and perform things with the most amount of presence possible, I can't possibly predict the outcome of all of the things that I do in my life and of all the things that will happen in the world. And therefore, I will surrender to the unknown because I don't know everything that's going to happen. And that surrendering to the unknown is a type of Ishvara Pranidhana. It's a type of letting go and saying, I will do the best I can in the present with the fullness of my intention. I will not be attached to the outcomes because I don't know what those outcomes are and I'm not in control of them. And so that surrendering to the unknown is an Ishvara Pranidhana for people who do not believe in God. Okay, so could I refer to any book? Details on homeostasis and vagus nerve? I would suggest the polyvagal theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. Anu wants to know, does the vagus nerve have any effect during meditation? Yes. The vagus nerve is toned through meditation. There have been studies on this, specifically the loving kindness meditation or the metta meditation has been shown to improve vagal tone, which is measured through heart rate variability. How to remove raga, Manjit wants to know, through doing yoga sadhana. So Patanjali gives many different sadhanas to do, and all of those will help to remove raga. And make sure that what the practice of yoga sadhana does, especially if you practice in the bhakti traditions, that it will shift your attachment to objects to attachment to the divine or attachment to God. So one of the ways of working with raga is to just not to think that all attachment is bad, but that some attachment will move you closer towards divinity. And so those will be positive attachments. And that's where you can begin to move your mind and heart towards. Galaxy A7 wants to know, where does karma fit into this? This may be a very wide subject. Yes, perhaps that's a wide subject. If you ask a little more specifically, then maybe I can try to answer. Veronica said, I had several episodes of total lack of strength, very low blood pressure, entering into a state of relaxation, no energy, not thinking. I will spend a few days in that state. I worried. I did several tests, nothing. I was told by a doctor it could be the vagus nerve. The doctor did not explain why and did not tell me what to do. I continue to have these episodes. Excuse me. So Veronica, I don't know specifically, and I am not a doctor. If your vagus nerve needs toning and you are doing some yoga, you could try some gentle types of restorative yoga. You could try also resonance breathing. It's a very good thing for toning the vagus nerve, as are humming or the Brahmari pranayama. All of those types of things can be good for toning the vagus. You can try them. You can contact me as well. I'm going to give you my email address right now, and I'm happy to try to help you out. But again, I'm not a doctor, so I could only give you suggestions from a yoga perspective. Okay, so Jane wants to know what's the daily cleaning Kriya methods we can use. Daily basis, important ones, brushing your teeth, scraping your tongue. And you can also do some Kriyas like Kapalabhati and alternate nostril breathing. I don't do any of the strong Kriyas like they teach in Hatha Yoga Pradipika anymore. I used to do them when I was younger, but I don't have as much time in the day. So my basic ones, brushing my teeth, scraping my tongue, Kapalabhati, alternate nostril breathing, taking a shower. Shrishti wants to know, how does practicing yoga relieve depression? What are the physiological changes in the brain? Okay, so this is like a very big topic. I could suggest to you that you look for an author named Rick Hanson, Richanson. And Rick has some wonderful books on this topic. We have to close in another 5 minutes? Yes, no problem. So I wouldn't say that, you could say, I guess, that yoga relieves depression. That's not necessarily the word that I would use for it. But yes, correct, Rick with a CK. And it's Anuradha, it's Hanson. But what we could say is that the yoga and all of the related practices can begin to rewire the brain. And that's what the brain does. It wires itself in different ways depending on what it's exposed to. So if you expose yourself to practices that are going to make you feel more integrated, centered, in touch with yourself, connected to people, feel better in your body, feel better in your nervous system, your brain is going to respond to this and begin to change itself so that that is what it's reflecting. So the things that you expose yourself to are the things that your brain is going to respond to. And through repeated exposure, your brain repeatedly changes until that becomes a new habit of the brain to respond in this manner. A very simple practice, for example, is something that Rick Hanson teaches called taking in the good, where you expose yourself to a positive thing every day. And after you expose yourself to that positive thing, you soak it in like a sponge and you hold on to it for 20 or 30 seconds. And you mentally replay it and you emotionally feel it and you feel it in your body as well. What did that positive thing feel like? And this is something he calls taking in the good. And when you continually do that, what happens is your brain begins to savor and enjoy positive moments of your life more naturally, and it changes the character trait, the underlying character trait of your mind. So the last thing I'll finish on here is that the way that we've been wired over many millions of years through evolution is to survive. We discussed that much earlier on in the lecture. And so one of the things that we need to do to survive is we need to avoid threat. We need to know that if there's danger, we're going to run away from it so we can survive. Even a single cell, amoeba, will move away from danger, move towards safety, move towards nourishment, move away from threat. And and we are made, and if a single cell will do that, imagine us, we're made of 37.2 trillion cells. So every single cell in our body actually wants to move towards nourishment and away from threat. So the way that our nervous system is evolved is to learn from negative experiences very quickly and to remember them, because we survive by being able to avoid a negative. We don't survive by only moving towards positive experiences. So we developed this thing called a negativity bias, that we learn quicker from a negative experience and less quickly from a positive one. So in the taking in the good practice and in asanas and pranayama and loving kindness meditation, especially when we do it with awareness and we soak in the feelings of these practices, we are taking in positive experience, soaking it in, and through the purposeful holding on to them, we're creating a new character trait of our mind, which isn't positive thinking, but it is positive being. And then we're tilting the scales of our mind, where before the brain would learn quicker from negativity, so it looks for negativity. But now, because we're holding on to goodness, we look and we see goodness rather than just seeing negativity. And now we have a character trait change of our mind. So what's a state is a changing state of mind, that's thinking. But a character trait is the underlying field or underlying reference through which we see the world. Okay, so we see in the very well-known and famous Sanskrit prayer, Sarve bhavantu sukhinaha, may all beings be happy. Sarve santu niramayaha, may all beings be free from disease. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu, may all see good. And how can we see good? By taking in the good and by changing the character of our mind, so that's what we see. And ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhaved, may none suffer from sorrow. Om, peace, peace, peace. So with that, I will finish the session. And I thank you, Anuradha, so much for the invitation, and Vinay Chandra for the invitation, and for Rasika for the co-hosting through GPIW. And it's been a pleasure to be with you tonight.
Thank you, Eddie. That was indeed a power-packed session. And we are so grateful for what you offered so generously. And many panelists, many attendees expressed their gratitude to what you have offered to them today. So thank you very much. And thank you, Hana, for co-hosting, for being part of this journey and curating some wonderful sessions that are going to come on behalf of GPIW. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Eddie.
If you want to share my website or email address with the attendees, it's no problem. You know, it takes me sometimes to answer the emails, but I do get around to them. And so anyone can contact me through the website as well.
Yes, I have given the website details in the chat panel. So kindly go through that. And he's also written 2 books that I have come across. One is on Guruji, that is on Patabi Joyce, and the other one is on One Small Thing. No?
One Simple Thing.
One Simple Thing. One Simple Thing. So One Simple Thing covers a lot of the issues that he referred to today. So please refer to that book to understand this more. What you gave us really was power-packed, so we would really want to listen to this lecture a few times. Therefore, people are asking for the recording. I would like to mention that all these sessions would be recorded and they'll be made available on Indica Yoga YouTube channel. So please visit and stay tuned with Indica Yoga website, Indica Yoga YouTube channel to listen and to watch these videos later. So I thank everyone who attended this session. We had about 160 all in all participants from various platforms, on FB Live, on YouTube Live, and on Zoom. So it was indeed a great session. Before we conclude, I would like to announce the 2 more sessions of the day. Srinivasji, can you please flash the sessions? So in the 11:30 to 12:30 session, we have Dr. Priya Vaidya, who will be speaking on spiritual wellness and the role of masters. And in the evening slot, that is between 7 to 8 p.m., we have Rodolphe Millia. He is one of the senior teachers in Europe. He is the director of Teachers Training School Cefito in France. He'll be speaking. In fact, it is an experiential session, Pranayama, the happiest way to awakening the Kundalini. So I invite you all to join throughout the day and also continue this journey for 1 whole month with us. With this, we'll bring the session to conclusion. Yes, Eddie, we would request you to give any tip or a guideline or an advice for all the aspirants, because we see many serious practitioners connecting with us on this platform.
Well, I guess one of the most efficacious practices, but probably a fairly a difficult one to do, but one that will lead to chitta vritti nirodha without much complicated effort, is the Maitri Karuna Mudita Upeksha Sukha Dukkha Punya Punya Vishayanam Bhavanatyaha Chitta Prasadanam. So to have friendliness towards those who are happy, to have compassion towards those who are suffering, to have sympathetic joy for those who are virtuous, and equanimity of mind for those who are not virtuous. And that is one practice you can do any time of day, whether you've eaten food, not eaten food, had a good night's sleep, not had a good night's sleep, are walking or sitting, are doing anything. So I'd say from Yoga Sutra, that would be easy all access and very apt practice for these times to try to do.
Thank you. That was a beautiful piece of advice, and that's a good note to conclude the session. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Hana. Thank you, technical team, and thank all the participants for their contribution.